further digging, and you can read this on offthehooksports.com, is Josh Heupel's buyout on his end, not what he gets. I know Tennessee fans are used to what the coach gets if he gets fired because it was buyout university there for a long time. And this is on the flip end. So if Josh Heupel up and decided to leave, this is where Tennessee would be in terms of the contractual setup if he left. If the Dallas Cowboys fired Mike McCarthy tomorrow and called him, and you wrote a column about the NFL is probably the greatest suitor that Tennessee would ever have to worry about, and I agree with that. But if you go back and you look at the contract, and I read through it, and it was a lot of fun, sarcasm, but it actually is with the new addendum. He would have to pay $8 million before December the 15th this year if he left. That tells you how dedicated to the program he is. Now, the hiring cycle is already done. So let's take that $8 million out of the equation. Let's make it $6 million, which it would be headed into the 2024 season. If he decided to go elsewhere, if Oklahoma had a changeover, if with the administration and they wanted their former star quarterback to come back, or the NFL came calling. But Caleb, that's still $6 million. And again, we're dealing with monopoly money, but $6 million is enough to give any NFL team or program pause to think, is this fiscally responsible? And then it goes down to 4 million and it goes to 3, 2, 1. But I would say there would be a contract extension way before that. So those numbers will probably never come in play. But what they are right now is if Josh Heupel wanted to walk away, say he won a national title for Tennessee and his stock is sky high, and he wanted to walk away next January the 15th, just pick a date, he would have to pay, or the university or the NFL team would have to pay $6 million for him to accept that job. I have never, frankly, and this is not hyperbole for those listening, and please hit the like button so we can bring some more people in on this, because this is the big news. If you want to listen to the, should he got 4, 5, 6 million? Should he have got more or less? Whatever. I mean, we can talk about that all day long and where he stacks up, and we will. But this is pretty much unprecedented. I've never heard of a coach having that sort of buyout on the leaving end, and I think it's part of the reason that they bumped him all the way from 5 to 9. It kind of goes both ways. But nevertheless, if it was a negotiating ploy to get more money, he has said he wants to be at Tennessee for the foreseeable future. And that's monstrous for a program after what they went through for 13 years.
Oh, it's huge. And it also kind of, I think Heupel has, unfortunately for other programs, put many other college football programs on notice to a certain degree, which is that they're going to look at the situation Tennessee was in 2 years ago. They're going to look at what's happened the last 2 years, and they're going to start saying, maybe that whole 3 years to rebuild a program isn't a thing anymore. Maybe 3 years for a coach isn't an excuse. Maybe they're all going to start trying to rebuild in 2 years. Now, there's some unique things. Every situation is unique to Tennessee. But, Dave, as long as you've been covering college football, have you ever seen a coach work out who wasn't very successful by his second year?
Who wasn't very successful?
Yeah, by his second full season. His second full season on the job hadn't at least already had a top 10 finish or something like that.
Man, that's tough. If you had a total rebuild by his second season, I would be curious to look and see what Dabo Swinney did in his second season since he took over. Didn't he take over midway through the season?
Yeah, I wasn't. Yeah, he took over 2008. That's a good point. Dabo Swinney.
That's the only one I can think of. I mean, most coaches do have some success. I mean, if you look back at Nick Saban, what were they? I believe they were 7-5 his first season, and he kicked some players off because of drug issues and because of discipline issues, and he had to make some moves. But they were very competitive in the second season under Nick Saban. Kirby Smart, I'm sure, was competitive. I don't remember his second season off the top of my head.
That was the year they played for the national title, so they were competitive.
They were pretty competitive, yeah. So, I mean, I think Kirby Smart was undervalued early in his career because he was still getting beat by Nick Saban early on. But obviously, we've seen that it takes time to climb Mount Saban, and he's been able to do that. So no, I guess most people do have success by the second season. This is pretty elite success. I mean, this is right up there with Kirby Smart. You bring up a great point. This is a team that was vying for a 4-team playoff, not a 12-team playoff, a 4-team playoff. And that's the excuse the coaches will use in the coming years. Like, yeah, year 2, I got in the playoff. Well, that just means you're a top 12 team. So, no, you bring up a great point. Knocking on the door in season number 2, I think that's highly unusual.
Yeah, yeah. And so I think it's starting to create a new, I think not just knocking on the door, but, knocking on the door at a program that was in complete shambles when Heupel took over. When Kirby Smart took over Georgia, we know this. Mark Richt, I know there were some issues there, but Mark Richt always recruited well. He, it wasn't like Kirby Smart walked into an empty cupboard when he took over Georgia. Georgia has consistently been top 5, top 10 recruiting, I'd say, since Mark Richt got there. Tennessee had one top 10 class in 4 years when Heupel took over, and half the roster had transferred out. They were facing probation and NCAA investigations. And by year 2, at one point, he's got them number 1 in the college football playoff rankings. So with that regard, yeah, I think that I think that you look at all of that and you say, you're right. Probably the high the high buyout came with the high salary, but Tennessee hasn't had a coach that Tennessee fans hoped Derek Dooley would work out. They hoped Jeremy Pruitt would work out. They hoped Butch Jones would work out. I'd say they were probably, of the 3, the most confident in Butch Jones just because of his early recruiting classes. But you didn't really know. They didn't really have any evidence. But you go to Josh Heupel after year 2, I don't really think there's a hope with Josh Heupel anymore. I think there's Tennessee fans and the administration knows this is going to work out, and so they don't want to lose him. And the other point is, you're right, you bring up monopoly money with the NFL and the $6 million buyout. Well, if Josh Heupel's getting hired to the NFL, it's not because of his winning at Tennessee. It's because of his offense. The same reason Cliff Kingsbury got hired, or the same reason Matt Rule got hired. He's getting hired because somebody wants to try that offensive scheme. Well, there's a few other coaches now in college football that are running that offensive scheme. Alex Golesh at South Florida is obviously the head coach there. He's obviously going to install that scheme. You've got at Old Dominion, their new coaching staff came from Fordham. They studied Heupel's scheme for 5 years, for 1 year, 3 years ago, during the pandemic. That's a Division I job now. Lincoln Riley runs a similar offense at USC. There are other coaches you could snag that you won't have to pay $6 million for to try that offense in the NFL.
Well, at some point, you would think it's all cyclical. The defense is going to catch up to the offense in this regard, and I believe that's going to happen. But the thing that separates Josh Heupel, in my opinion, is his ability to take that a step further. So whatever it becomes, if they change the rules so that the wishbone is once again the most prolific offense, I think Josh Heupel could adapt to that. I don't think he's a one-trick pony, and I think his willingness to adapt and his intelligence to be able to adapt is what makes him really stand out in the eyes of the NFL and the eyes of college football and any schools that might want to come after him. It is funny, and I want to get into this a little bit later. Some of the coaches that make as much or more right in the ballpark of what Josh Heupel makes. Mel Tucker, $9.5 million. We mentioned Mark Stoops, $8.75 million. Lane Kiffin, $9 million. So we're going to break down some of those a little bit later in the program. So be sure and stay tuned and hit the like button so we can bring more people in. Now, Smoky Mountain Red brought up a good point. Not elite success, but James Franklin at Vanderbilt was impressive in year 2. He was 9-4. Well, that's fair, but Vanderbilt, by the same token, basically has 5 gimmies on their schedule, or at least 4 in their non-conference schedule. They don't play anybody. So I think James Franklin is a good coach. I don't think he's a great coach. I don't think he's an elite coach.